In the far reaches of forgotten space, where old battles leave no monuments, a broken ship and 12 lost names were meant to be erased forever. But history has a heartbeat. And sometimes, just sometimes, the past fights back. This is the story of the Iron Comet, of soldiers betrayed, of truths buried, and of the last war fought not with guns, but with memory. Take a breath. Lean in, because once you hear the comet's call, you'll never forget it. The stars over the dying halo didn't shine. They pulsed like old warning lights, flickering through the cracked viewports of a maintenance station long forgotten by any chart that mattered. Dust drifted in lazy spirals through the dim corridors, stirred only by the sigh of recycled air and the occasional twitch of aging ventilation units. Halric Dorne sat hunched in a reclined pilot's chair, boots crossed, staring at a bank of silent monitors. Most didn't work anymore. He didn't need them to. The only one that mattered, a narrow green waveform display, still flickered once every 16 seconds, measuring faint signals across dead space. It hadn't changed in years. He ran a hand over his bearded jaw, feeling the deep lines carved there like etchings on a war monument. The echo core's heartbeat, an ancient sensor loop still wired deep in the station's spinal conduit, sent back the same pattern it always had. Nothing, just a void breathing. A small drone whirred to life nearby, its repair arm clicking as it tried to fix a leak that had been dripping for 5 years. Halric had long since stopped fixing what didn't scream. The machine's determination amused him, in a way. He muttered under his breath, "You're wasting your time, Juno." The drone paused, as if insulted, and buzzed off into another corridor. Halric exhaled through his nose, slow and bitter. Time didn't pass here. It pooled, stagnant. If he closed his eyes, he could still hear the Iron Comet's engines when they ran hot, still feel the tremor of its hull beneath his boots. But that was 3 decades ago, before the Council had buried their truth beneath a mountain of sanctioned silence. The memory of Delkar Reach crept in like a leak he couldn't patch. Faces, flames, orders refused. It didn't matter now. Not out here. Not in a shell of a station whose last transmission was logged 12 years ago. Then something blinked. Just once. The green waveform stuttered. Halric sat up slowly, spine cracking from too much stillness. He tapped the screen. No response. But he knew what he saw. After years of nothing, the echo core had hiccuped. He pulled himself from the chair, legs slow to obey, and limped toward the console bank. A faint light on the corner console, a physical light, not digital, began to glow amber. It was tied to a proximity relay. Halric hadn't triggered that system in over a decade. Someone was approaching. He reached beneath the console, fingers brushing past a cloth-wrapped bundle of old gear. His hand paused over a cold metal grip, still loaded, still ready. He didn't pull it free. Not yet. Instead, he straightened, shoulders squared, and looked out through the viewport into the vast hollow dark of the dying halo. "Damn fools," he whispered. "You really found me." The monitor blinked again, this time with purpose. A comms packet was being received, non-government, encrypted, traced to a civilian beacon. Whoever they weren't here by accident. And Halric Dorne knew. Silence was no longer an option. The knock echoed like a relic of a time long buried. 2 firm raps against the pressure door that hadn't opened for anyone in years. Halric stood motionless in the shadows of the corridor, eyes narrowed at the dim security cam feed. The figure waiting outside wore a rugged utility coat, dust slick from long travel, with a satchel slung low and a recorder drone hovering nervously at his shoulder. Not military, not bounty hunter. Too clean, too young. He punched the manual override. The door hissed open with a reluctant groan, metal scraping against frost-bitten seals. The young man stepped in with hesitant confidence, boots tapping on steel, eyes scanning everything with a hunger Halric hadn't seen in decades. "Terran Vex," the visitor said, offering a hand that went ignored. "Freelance journalist. I came a long way to find you." Halric folded his arms. "Then you've wasted your time." Terran didn't flinch. "I found a name. Yours, buried deep in a decommissioned transport manifest tied to a non-existent vessel, the Iron Comet. The Council's archives listed as scrapped. No details. No service records. No survivors." He met Halric's gaze. "But I think that's a lie. And I think you know why." Halric's silence stretched long enough to become oppressive. Finally, he turned, gesturing toward the dark interior of the station. "Follow me or leave. But I don't answer questions in doorways." They walked in near silence, the station groaning softly around them like a sleeping beast. Terran tried to stay composed, but the weight of history pressed down with every step. Burning names on old lockers, shattered plaques of forgotten campaigns, and the overwhelming sense that this place hadn't just been abandoned. It had been erased. Why now? Halric asked suddenly, stopping in front of a sealed bulkhead. Terran hesitated. Because stories vanish every year. Heroes disappear. And if someone doesn't start digging soon, we'll wake up one day and remember nothing real. Only what they let us. Halric didn't respond. But in that moment, something in his posture shifted. Not much, just enough to suggest that the wall between them wasn't impenetrable. Behind the bulkhead, the past waited. And somewhere in the dark, truth was still breathing. Halric's hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the analog dials on a decades-old communications relay. The relic sparked faintly as he bypassed the digital filters. New systems had a tendency to clean up unauthorized traffic. But Halric wasn't interested in sanitized noise. He was listening for the truth hidden in the static. Terran stood behind him, arms folded, watching. "What are you doing?" "Verifying something," Halric muttered. "Something I hoped I'd never hear again." The relay clicked, and the display panel blinked to life. A narrowband signal flashed red, pulsing with sharp intervals, too precise to be random. Halric leaned in, his breath caught in his throat. There it was. Operation Veilfall. Active protocol. Level 5, Erasure event. Target. All surviving records related to the Iron Comet and Delkar Reach. A cold sweat broke across Halric's brow. The Council hadn't just buried the past. They were about to incinerate it. Not just the documents. The memories. The testimonies. The final anchor points of truth. "I thought they'd forgotten about us," he whispered. "Turns out they were just waiting until no one was left to object." Terran frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means we're almost out of time," Halric replied, straightening slowly. He moved to a wall panel hidden behind a rusted conduit, and keyed in a code he hadn't used in 30 years. Hydraulics groaned awake as a portion of the floor split open, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was dry, metallic, and haunted by silence. Terran's eyes widened. "What's down there?" Halric's voice was low, the only thing they couldn't scrub from the records. He descended without waiting for a reply. Terran hesitated, then followed, the lights flickering to life one by one as they stepped deeper into the belly of the forgotten station. The hum of buried generators returned, like a heartbeat long suppressed. At the end of the hall, sealed behind a thick blast door, lay the past. Halric placed a weathered hand against the access panel. "Everything they want erased," he said, "starts here." With a hiss of pressurized seals, the door began to open. The door groaned open, flooding the chamber with dim, flickering light. Terran stepped through the threshold and froze. There, half buried in layers of dust, reinforced support scaffolds, and faded emergency tarps, lay the broken husk of a ship. The plating was scorched and fractured, scorched black in places, warped silver in others. And there, faint but unmistakable, etched into the forward hull in worn lettering, were the words, "Iron Comet." Terran took a step forward, heart pounding. The ship was smaller than he imagined. Compact, functional, scarred by time and battle. But it wasn't dead. Not entirely. Its presence thrummed in the air, heavy with memory. Every dent, every scrape, every section patched with mismatched metal told a story. A story someone had tried very hard to silence. "You kept it," Terran breathed. Halric didn't look at him. Wasn't mine to lose. Terran walked slowly alongside the hull, running his hand just above the surface, afraid to touch it. He spotted burn marks in a spread pattern, signs of close-range ion blasts. Another section bore the unmistakable scars of forced entry. Someone had fought to breach it from the outside. "They tried to destroy it," Terran murmured. Halric nodded once. "They tried to erase us. Not just from history. From existence." He stopped near the aft access ramp. It hung open slightly, warped beyond ceiling. Halric leaned against the railing, his voice distant. "The Comet refused orders at Delkar Reach. We chose not to fire, chose not to murder civilians for the sake of policy. And for that, they labeled us traitors." Terran turned to face him, stunned. "But the records said..." "They say what they're told to say," Halric cut in. "Truth doesn't survive bureaucracy. But memory can." Terran stared at the hull again. The Iron Comet wasn't just a relic. It was a witness. And the Council wanted it gone because it remembered. The air inside the hidden chamber turned colder, heavier, as if the comet itself had exhaled some long-held breath. Terran was still staring at the hull when Halric's wrist comm lit up with a soft, rhythmic pulse, urgent but silent. He tapped it. A data stream scrolled across the cracked display. Operation Veilfall // in progress. Multi-node erasure event detected. Targets: Varion Spire, Outpost 9, Loris Archive, Delkar Memorial Grid. Halric's face darkened. They've started it. Terran leaned in. Started what? They're not just wiping files anymore, Halric said, voice sharp with something between fury and fear. They're sterilizing the record. Every trace of the comet. Every byte, every backup, every memory anchor tied to what happened at Delkar Reach. Gone. But there have to be copies. Independent mirrors, encrypted backups, black box shards. Halric looked at him. There were. Most of them were planted by us. Survivors. We hid fragments in civilian nets, AI drift nodes, old cargo beacons. But the Council has the resources now, and the legal clearance. They're using PulseNet authority. Total override. Terran backed away from the hull, the weight of it all slamming into his chest. So if they finish, there'll be nothing left, Halric finished. Not even rumors. He stepped toward an old console and slid back a dust-covered panel, revealing a physical drive socket, something ancient. Mechanical, immune to remote erasure. We got fragments here, he said. Pieces they can't reach. Yet, Terran swallowed hard. Then we better make sure the rest of the galaxy hears them. Halric locked eyes with him. Then you better be ready to run. Because once we light this fuse, they'll come. Outside the station, in the stillness of the dying halo, a silent pulse rippled outward, one of hundreds, reaching farther each second. Erasure had begun. The old relay room hadn't seen light in years. Halric Dorne ducked beneath a drooping pipe and stepped into the chamber carved beneath the main station. It still smelled like ionized dust and coolant, and the only sound was the steady ping of temperature regulators trying to stabilize a room long left behind. He brushed frost from a heavy control panel embedded in the wall, exposing a cluster of mechanical toggles and dials marked in a language that hadn't been used in 3 decades. Code only the crew of the Iron Comet had known. Terran Vex stood in the doorway, watching silently. What is this place? Halric didn't answer immediately. He connected a rusted cable from the panel into a junction box marked Phase Mantle Access. With a soft hum, ancient subspace relays powered up. Lines of pale green text began crawling across the cracked interface. This system was never part of the official network, Halric finally said. It ran parallel, silent, hidden from fleet control. He flipped a switch and a faint chime echoed through the station. Then came the voice prompt, gravelly, synthetic, and unmistakably old. Encryption tunnel established. Enter call sign. Halric took a breath. Old line. Comet class. 39 Echo Black. Confirmed. Another pause. Then, the final prompt. Send wide burst message. Halric hesitated. His fingers hovered over the confirmation key. There was no going back from this. Terran stepped closer. They'll trace it, won't they? Eventually. Then why risk it? Halric's voice lowered. Because if they still remember, they'll come. He keyed the final sequence. The screen displayed the message being sent across the Phase Mantle network, a ghost path that threaded through outdated subspace channels long considered obsolete. Most of the galaxy had stopped using them. But not them. Not the old line. Across thousands of light years, hidden receivers flickered to life, abandoned supply posts, weathered listening buoys, personal implants long dormant. The message was short. Only 6 words. You still hear the comet's call? Halric leaned back in his chair, watching the transmission status blink. Sent. Delivered. Echo pending. He didn't expect an immediate response, but he knew they would feel it. The vibration in their bones, the memories unlocked by a phrase no one else would understand. Terran's voice broke the silence. You think any of them are still alive? Halric didn't look at him. If they are, it just woke up. The light on the wall blinked exactly twice. Then it stopped. In a small, cluttered habitation pod orbiting the rim of the Laurelin Wastes, Mara Quill stirred from a rest chair. Her body didn't move much, couldn't, not since the injury on Station Juno left her paralyzed from the waist down. But her mind was as sharp as the day she calibrated the first drive core of the Iron Comet. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The panel on her wrist pad displayed a simple line of text, pulsing with a green hue she hadn't seen in years. You still hear the comet's call? Her breath caught. She hadn't heard those words in over 3 decades. Not since the court-martial hearings, not since the asset seizures, not since the council had declared them ghosts. She reached over to the arm of her chair and tapped 3 quick commands. Across the room, an old containment locker hissed open. Inside, wrapped in a polymer sheath, rested a cylindrical module, sleek, black, and humming faintly with internal power. The Echo Core. It was the only surviving fragment of the Comet's original drive spine. Mara had risked her life to smuggle it out during the takedown, hiding it through false identities and station relocations ever since. Not because it had value, but because it remembered. Its neural lattice still held uncorrupted memory shards from Delkar Reach, and from the day the Comet refused its orders. With careful, methodical movements, Mara guided her chair onto a small platform lift. The drone assistant, a battered old maintenance unit she called Tip, floated over and latched into place behind her, humming with pre-programmed routine. Prep the jump pod, Mara whispered. Secure the core. No public channel access. Tip blinked twice in acknowledgement and zipped off toward the launch bay. As Mara descended through the narrow shaft to the ship cradle, she looked once more at the message still glowing on the screen. Others might have moved on. Others might have buried the past, rewritten it, or simply forgotten. But Mara Quill remembered everything. And now someone else did too. In the underlevels of Gorin Spire, far below the polished towers of the bureaucratic elite, Dre Calder sat alone in a run-down cantina lit by broken neon and bitterness. The world outside moved fast, filled with politics and posturing. Down here it was simpler, credits for silence, drinks for memories, and backroom cards with people who never asked for names. Dre's left, I was gone, blown out by a pulse mine during the Delkar Reach standoff, but the replacement lens in his right glowed amber in low light. Behind it, neural stabilizers flickered to keep him sane. Without them, the tremors would return, the voices, the guilt. He rolled a capsule of neuroregulator between his fingers. It clicked once inside the dispenser behind his ear, then hissed as it injected a stabilizing dose. Just enough to stay cold. Just enough to stay sharp. A low chime pulsed through the comm band under his collar. It was old tech. Too old. No one should be using that frequency anymore. He froze. The message blinked across his retinal display, soft and unmistakable. You still hear the Comet's call? His hand tensed around the capsule case. Across the room, a man in a charcoal gray coat stirred. He wasn't part of the usual crowd. Too still. Too clean. Watching but pretending not to. Dre turned slowly, draining the last of his synth whiskey. You picked the wrong damn night, he muttered. The man stood. His hand slipped toward his belt. Not for a weapon, but for a neural suppressor. Council trained. Council sent. Dre didn't give him time. One fluid motion. A blade, ceramic, thin, quiet, slipped from his sleeve and sank into the man's side. Dre guided him gently to the floor before the room even noticed. He whispered into the dying man's ear. That's for making me remember before I was ready. He stood, pocketed a flash drive from the man's coat, standard issue tracker, and dropped a cred stick beside the body. For cleanup, he said flatly to the bartender, who didn't look up. Outside, the night smelled like rain and oil. He walked fast, weaving through alleys until he reached the stashed dropship in a repurposed sewage tunnel. It still bore the faded emblem of a transport company long since bankrupt. Perfect cover. Dre powered up the engines, locked in coordinates, and checked the comms. No more hesitation. The old line was calling. And Dre Calder still knew how to kill. The lights inside the orbital clinic above Tellar 6 flickered as if the station itself was holding its breath. Solon Arc, once chief medic of the Iron Comet, now lived among the forgotten, serving as a volunteer physician in a district where government records ended and broken people began. His hands, though weathered by age, still moved with quiet precision. He just finished sealing the chest wound of a smuggler when the terminal in the corner of the med bay chimed, twice, then once more, a pattern he hadn't seen in decades. He froze. The smuggler mumbled through half-conscious lips. Doc, that the med evac? Solon didn't answer. He crossed the room, heart thudding in his chest, and activated the terminal. You still hear the Comet's call? He exhaled slowly, knees weakening beneath him. He hadn't heard that phrase since the tribunal, since the council labeled them non-compliant personnel and wiped their mission logs clean. Behind a false wall in his quarters, locked beneath 5 layers of encrypted seals, sat an unassuming black data box no larger than a lunch tray. Inside it, The true casualty records of Delkar Reach. Names, coordinates, species, civilian IDs. It was everything the Council had erased, and Solon had risked his life to preserve. But now it wasn't just about preserving. Someone was lighting the match, and the Council knew it. He could feel it in the sudden stillness outside the medbay. The quiet came too fast. No footsteps, no overhead docking clanks, no chatter from the main concourse. That's when the lights cut out. He grabbed the data box, slipped it into a padded satchel, and pressed a finger to his comm implant. Tez cell, we're leaving. A service drone detached from the ceiling, extending landing gear and activating a small escort protocol. Together, they moved through the darkened corridors, bypassing major lifts and access points. Solon knew every shortcut. He'd mapped them himself during the early years of hiding. He didn't head toward Starship. Instead, he descended into the maintenance core, where a gutted salvage hauler, one he'd been slowly restoring for over a decade, waited under layers of debris and rust. Its systems were ancient, loud, and unmistakably real. Perfect for going unnoticed. Solon powered it up. Engines groaned, reactors sputtered, but the vessel lived. As he cleared Tellar VI's atmosphere, sensors pinged Council patrols sweeping nearby sectors. Too late. He was already gone. The cargo bay beneath the maintenance station creaked under weight it hadn't borne in years. One by one, they came. Mara Quill's pod docked first, extending a mechanical ramp to lower her onto the floor. Her hover chair hummed as she moved toward the center of the bay, the echo core sealed in its containment cradle behind her. Then Dre Calder stepped in through the side hatch, his coat still damp from acid rain, his amber cyber eye scanning the room with practiced calculation. He gave Mara a nod, half respect, half memory, and said nothing. Moments later, the salvager's hauler screeched into place with a lurch that shook the walls. The rear ramp lowered with a hiss, and Solon Ark emerged, carrying his black satchel as if it contained not just data, but decades of ghosts. Halric stood in the center of the bay, beside the scorched hull of the Iron Comet. He looked older now, more tired than the day before. But something had returned to his eyes, an ember that hadn't burned this bright since the day they lost the ship. He waited until they had all gathered. No speeches, no salutes, just the creaking silence of old warriors breathing the same air again. I wasn't sure any of you would come, Halric said. Mara tilted her head. You called. Dre leaned against a crate. Didn't say no one would bleed. Solon dropped the satchel with a soft thud. We brought the truth. What happens next is on us. Halric looked at each of them in turn. We won't win, he said. Not in any way that counts medals or monuments. He stepped forward, resting a hand on the comet's battered frame. But we won't be silent. Not anymore. And in that moment, the air felt different, like history itself was inhaling, preparing to listen. Varion's spire towered like a blade plunged into the crust of a dead moon. An obsidian monolith bristling with antenna arrays, signal dampeners, and centuries of secrets. It wasn't built to house people. It was built to bury history. Inside the cloaked transport, drifting just beyond sensor range, Halric Dorne studied the rotating schematic of the spire's internal structure. Dozens of chambers, hundreds of seal nodes, no surface-level access points. Everything of value sat beneath reinforced shielding designed to outlast wars. It's a tomb, Dre Calder muttered, arms crossed. You don't dig through a tomb unless you plan to wake something ugly. Mara Quill, wired into the ship's secondary console from her hover chair, didn't look up. It's not the dead I'm worried about. It's the ones still writing the epitaph. The plan wasn't elegant, but elegance was a luxury none of them had left. Solon Ark had spent years charting legacy routes through abandoned maintenance conduits beneath the spire, tunnels long since deleted from official schematics, but never fully sealed. They'd exploit one of them now. 30 minutes later, their boots, well, except Mara's humming glide unit, touched down on a rust-scarred panel deep within a forgotten cargo sublevel. The air was dry and cold, the lighting minimal. Perfect for a place the Council of Erasure didn't want anyone wandering into. Keep chatter tight, Halric ordered, tapping the side of his throat mic. They may not know we're here yet. Let's not ruin the surprise. The group moved like muscle memory, old instincts sliding back into place despite the years. Dre swept corners, pulse sidearm drawn. Mara ran live diagnostics on the data lines as they passed. Solon watched for tampering or traps. Halric led the way, tracking the narrowest thread of a signal from their decrypted data packet, a corrupted archive marker tag, Delkar Reach // contingency. 27. They reached a reinforced door sealed by dual biometrics, an older model, pre-civilian encryption. Dre smirked. Cute. Mara wheeled forward. Back up. Let the grandma work. Her fingers moved across a rusted panel, connecting a small cylinder to the port. The echo core emitted a faint tone, then another. The door clicked open after a moment of agonizing silence. Inside, rows of archive pillars, towering columns of frozen memory blocks stacked in sterile order. Holographic tags hovered in the air, most labeled as routine, census scans, migration paths, economic transactions. But the far corner bore a warning in blood-red glyphs. Level 5 restricted. Operation Veilfall / classified under Central Memory Act. Halric stepped toward it, eyes narrowing. That's it. Solon approached a console beneath the red tag and carefully pulled a backup key from his satchel. This will get us partial decryption, enough to view the logs. He inserted the key. The console whirred to life, and then the lights dimmed. Power reroute, Mara whispered. They know someone's poking around. Data began to scroll on the screen. Corrupted images. Fragmented sound. Distorted voice logs layered beneath Warzone telemetry. The more they pulled in, the more a picture formed. The Iron Comet, coded as Unit 4C, Row, receiving orders to fire on a civilian transport vessel and refusing. Then, another voice. Deeper. Authority laced with contempt. Admiral Tyron Kess. If Unit 4C, Row won't comply, designate them rogue. Initiate full suppression protocol. Public explanation. Engine failure during engagement. All primary logs redirected to post-mission scrub. Solon's face went pale. He planned it all. Dre leaned forward. They pinned a massacre on us to cover up their own damn war crime. Halric stared at the screen. Not just a cover-up, a restructuring of truth. Mara tapped a control node. The system's pulling the core logs now. We need to extract and get out. Fast. As the transfer began, an alarm blared overhead. Red lights pulsed through the chamber. Outside the archive room, faint metallic footsteps began to echo down the corridor. We're not alone, Dre growled, raising his weapon. Halric turned toward the others, voice steady but hard. Buy us 2 minutes. Just 2. The contact node was buried beneath an old orbital repair ring drifting near Yarnak's belt. Officially abandoned, unofficially surveilled. The station looked like a corpse in space. Hollow, silent, but not quite dead. Which made it perfect for Cash and Jor. Halric stood in the airlock, arms crossed as the seal depressurized. The old oxygen compressors hissed in resistance before finally allowing him inside. Dim lights flickered overhead. The smell of burned plastic and ozone lingered, like time had tried to scrub something out, but failed. Cashin sat at the far end of the central work bay, legs curled beneath him, surrounded by half-functional terminals, floating data fragments, and broken drone parts that buzzed softly as if still trying to be useful. His eyes were vacant, wandering, and jittery, like they were chasing memories that didn't want to be caught. Halric stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Cashin, he said. The younger man blinked. I've heard that name before. You used to own it. Cashin's head tilted. Maybe, or maybe it was borrowed. That happens, right? When you've had your file rewritten more than once. Halric glanced around the room. Fragments of audio logs floated like translucent ghosts in the air. Some looping fragments of council meetings, others just static. But all of them were partial, purposely scrambled. Mara's voice crackled through Halric's comm. His cortical implants are council grade. That means memory suppression, maybe rewriting. If he's holding the original recording, it's probably locked behind something emotional. Something they couldn't delete without killing him. Halric crouched beside Cashin. Do you remember Delkar Reach? Cashin flinched. For a second, everything stopped, even the static. No, he whispered. No, that name, it feels wrong. Like it was behind a door I locked for a reason. Halric didn't press him. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out an old audio device, small, scratched analog. He placed it gently on the floor between them. Press play, he said. You made this. Before they got to you. Cashin hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers. The device clicked. The recording was rough. His own voice spoke, younger, more certain. This is programmer Cashin Jor. Timestamp 1819, post-Delkar debrief. I am creating a backup of Command Channel 7. This contains the unedited voice order from Admiral Tyron Kess authorizing the strike. The file cut off. Cashin froze, pupils dilating. And then the tremor began. His whole body shook, neural implants blinking red in warning. Memories returned like broken glass. Shards of screaming civilians, locked command screens. The moment he decided to save something he wasn't supposed to. He screamed. Halric grabbed his shoulders, steadying him. Easy. Breathe, damn it. The scream collapsed into a gasp, then a sob. I remember, Cashin choked. I didn't run the scrub. I hid the file. Buried it in a memory anchor tied to my DNA. I thought, if I forgot, they'd leave me alone. Halric nodded slowly. Where is it? Cashin's eyes flicked toward a biometric port recessed into the wall. There. But if you access it, they'll know I remember. The tether's live. It'll ping the council. Let them watch, Halric said. The truth's been quiet long enough. They found Vorak Dan on the edge of Iliad Drift, living under a false name, managing logistics for a garbage hauler that barely stayed pressurized. The man had disappeared so completely. Some of the crew had wondered if he'd ever existed at all. But when the call went out, he answered. Now, as he stood inside the echoing corridor of the reclaimed Iron Comet, tension hung in the air like radiation, unspoken but burning. Dre Calder paced nearby, eyes locked on him. I still think we should have spaced him the moment he stepped through the hatch. Solanark raised a calming hand. We don't have to forget, but we do need what's in his head. Vorak said nothing. He didn't flinch under the weight of their stares. Instead, he walked to the central system's terminal and knelt, pulling a small kit from his coat. Inside was a series of diagnostic nodes. Obsolete, coded in a language even modern AI refused to interpret. He plugged them in with steady hands. I designed the first iteration of the memory anchor system for blacksite data vaults, he finally said. Encrypted storage, keyed to living neural signatures. Redundant, self-destructing, invisible to scans. Built to keep secrets even from ourselves. Mara, watching from her hover chair, raised an eyebrow. And yet, here you are. Vorak didn't look at her. Guilt's a slow-burning fuel. But lasts. Howard stepped closer. You leaked our location to the council before the purge. Got us branded, scattered, erased. Why come back now? Vorak paused, then inserted the final key. Because the truth didn't die with the comet. I did. The system pinged as the first data blocks emerged. Blurred visuals. Metadata in ancient formatting. Audio cues that twisted and reformed into moments. Some familiar, some not. Cashin Jor's recovered data fragment pulsed on the adjacent console, but remained locked, its encryption rooted in the very anchor Vorak had built. He frowned. They chained it tighter than I expected. There's a recursive lock, keyed to biosignature pairs. Dre snapped. English Vorak. It won't open unless the original coder is present, and someone they trusted. Cashin, still pale, stepped forward. And if I don't remember who I trusted? Vorak didn't hesitate. Try me. Cashin reached out, hand shaking, and pressed it against the reader alongside Vorak's. For a second, nothing. Then the system flared green. The anchor opened. Data cascaded through the screens. Command logs, video briefings, and the full audio of Admiral Tyron Kess authorizing the civilian strike. Coordinates. Ship IDs. A silent order. Frame the comet. Silence the crew, and rewrite the record. Dre exhaled sharply. There it is. Everything we've said, proven. But Vorak's hand didn't move. His expression tightened. I can't hold the key. It's synced to a time burn. Once I pull away, the anchor collapses. Mara blinked. So stay connected. He met Halric's eyes. I only ever get one thing right, Vorak said quietly. Might as well be this. A final sequence initiated. Data began streaming to a backup channel. And Vorak didn't let go. The war room of the Iron Comet hadn't seen this many active displays since its final mission. Now, its dim holoscreens flickered back to life, casting a cold blue glow over the crew's weathered faces. The decrypted feed from the memory anchor streamed across the central console. It was raw, untouched, the kind of data no government ever meant to survive. Halric stood closest to the display, jaw tight, arms locked behind his back as the truth unfolded line by line. A time-stamped video log began. Date, 41.9.87 / location. Delkar Reach Ops Channel. Parties, Admiral Tyron Kess. Command / Task Group 7 Omega. The feed showed Admiral Kess seated in a secure transmission chamber, surrounded by high-ranking staff. His voice was calm, clipped, every word sharpened by calculated detachment. Unit 40, designated the Iron Comet, has declined the engagement directive. Civilian vessels remain in the strike zone. Recommend Protocol Theta. Erase unit via tactical malfunction. Push fabricated telemetry to fleet-wide logs. Dre's fist clenched against the wall beside him. Another log surfaced. Comet's final internal comms before their systems were overridden. Halric's own voice played back through the room, recorded decades ago. Broken, furious. Delkar Reach is full of civilians. Children, we are not executing a sweep and burn on a refugee flotilla. You can court-martial me when this is over. Then silence. Then chaos. The Comet's engines have been remotely tampered with mid-flight, causing a destabilization event. On the official record, it was listed as catastrophic drive failure during combat maneuvers. But here, now, they watch the fabrication in real time. Command subroutines rewritten, logs wiped and replaced, witnesses reassigned, files sent to Council of Erasure for terminal sealing. Mara will turn away from the screen. We were the scapegoat. Solon Arc swallowed hard. And Kess never faced trial. He got promoted, decorated, buried our names under his legacy. Terran Vex, silent until now, leaned closer to the console, tapping through the metadata tags. These files, he said slowly, they're formatted for real-time broadcast. This was supposed to be a fail-safe archive, not just a vault. Mara's eyes widened. So Kess knew. Somewhere deep down, he knew this might leak, and he made sure it could only leak all at once. Dre nodded grimly. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Halric didn't speak right away. He just watched the final segment play. A classified message labeled Eyes Only Strategic Directive. In it, Kess looked straight into the recorder. History remembers what we allow it to. If the Iron Comet falls in silence, so be it. Heroes are chosen, not proven. Halric turned from the screen. We're not giving them silence. The moment the final checksum hit 92%, the lights on the Iron Comet's war room dimmed, then flared red. Halric spun toward the command panel. We're being boarded. Mara was already scanning the ship's defense grid. Phantom signature breached Deck B. No exterior docking. They portaled in Council style. Dre Calder didn't wait for orders. He grabbed his sidearm and sprinted for the lower corridor. But it was too late. A sharp crack echoed through the intercom. The team's datapad lit up with an internal alert. Alert. Primary memory holder detained. Zone 7. Subject, Solon Arc. Truthspire archive, compromised. Terran's face went pale. They took Solon. He had the original core fragment with him. Mara's voice cut in sharply. They've severed the uplink. The data transfer's frozen. We're stuck at 96%. Halric slammed a fist into the console. That archive is everything. Proof, names, command logs. We lose it. We lose the galaxy's only reason to care. Terran stepped forward. Solon's alive. I tagged his med implant. They didn't kill him. They want leverage. Dre reappeared in the hatchway, breathing hard. 2 agents. Tactical armor, cloaks. I clipped one, but they vanished through a mobile gate. Solon went with them. Unconscious. Halric stood frozen between the displays and the still warm chair Solon had vacated minutes earlier. On one side, the data stream. On the other, a man who had held onto the truth longer than anyone. Mara looked up. We can retrieve the archive manually, but it'll take another hour, maybe more. They'll kill Solon by then. Or worse. Terran stared at the red dot pulsing on his handheld. We got a 20-minute jump window to intercept them. After that, they'll disappear into secure orbitals. Silence settled across the room. It was Halric who finally broke it. No vote, he said quietly. We don't have time for that. He looked at the Truthspire archive terminal, then toward the exit ramp. I'll go for Solon. Alone. Dre shook his head. Not alone. Mara's voice was calm. You two go. I'll stay. I built Comet's secondary matrix. I can finish the extraction. Halric's eyes met hers. You sure? She smirked. I've got a chair with guns and a grudge. Let them come. Terran handed Halric the tracker. I'll back her up here. The team split, fractured by choice, united by purpose. As Halric and Dre launched into the void to chase a fading signal, Mara turned to the blinking terminal, cracked her knuckles, and whispered, let's finish what they tried to erase. The raiding platform where they held Solon Arc was orbiting deep within the shadow of a dying star, camouflaged under the jurisdiction of a United Stellar Accord, but unmistakably operated by the Council of Erasure. Halric Dorne and Dre Calder didn't bother asking permission. Their approach was silent, cloaked, and direct. cutting through the drifting debris field like a needle threading vengeance. They breached the outer hull through an old maintenance corridor, bypassing updated security by using hand-forged access tools from a time before AI managed everything. Dre crouched beside a hatch, weapon drawn. 3 guards. Pattern movement. Not bots. Halric whispered back. We don't shoot unless they see the core. They moved in. The facility wasn't just a prison. It was a vault, a mobile lockbox for memories no government wanted to face. Solon was being held in a containment room with a neural dampener strapped to his spine, eyes closed, barely breathing. The Truthspire archive sat beside him, sealed in a carbon-sheathed cylinder, one that pulsed faintly with heat. It wasn't just storage. It was active. They took both without firing a shot. But the retreat wasn't silent. An alarm blared as the corridor lights snapped red. The station's AI had finally caught on. Defense drones swarmed out of the walls, sleek, fast, deadly. Dre dropped 2 with precision shots before they made it 5 feet. Don't stop moving. Halric barked, throwing a disruptor charge behind them. The blast buckled the hallway, buying them seconds. Back aboard the Iron Comet, Mara's voice came over comms. Solar disruptor is primed. Reactors stabilized. If you got the archive, now's the time. They burst onto the bridge with Solon barely conscious, cradling the archive like a sacred artifact. Mara turned from the main console, her eyes locking on the core in Halric's hands. You got it. He nodded. We lost 20 seconds to an alarm. She didn't smile. Then we're already late. Halric turned to the weapons panel, one that hadn't been touched in 38 years. A red switch blinked at the far corner, covered in a transparent lock plate etched with faded warning glyphs. Solar disruptor array. 1 use only. Manual engagement required. Mara wheeled beside him. We activate this. We're not sneaking away. It's a beacon. Every ship within 5 sectors will see us lighting up the void. Halric replied, we're not hiding anymore. He broke the seal. The hum that followed was unlike anything the comet had ever produced. Deep, vibrating, elemental. The echo core reacted instantly, glowing with a low-frequency pulse that sent feedback through the bulkheads. The ship felt alive. Dre leaned against the console. How long until discharge? Mara scanned the diagnostics. 6 minutes to full amplification. We can redirect the beam to carry the Truthspire data. Once it fires, every listening node in the Accord will receive it. And the cost? She hesitated. It'll drain the core and destabilize the containment lattice. The ship won't survive another hour. No one spoke. Solon stirred from the bench, his voice ragged. Then let's make that hour matter. Halric gave the order. The Iron Comet turned from the black and began its final run, heading straight toward the stars it had once fought beneath, reactor flaring like a war drum, calling time itself to bear witness. The launch clamps groaned as the Iron Comet lifted free from the dry dock cradle buried deep within the orphan belt. For the first time in 38 years, the ship breathed. Plasma couplings surged along her spine, lighting up long-dead conduits with bursts of blue fire. Hull plating, still scarred from battles erased from the record, shuddered as reactor pressure ramped toward critical. The forward shields flickered. Not strong, not stable, but enough. On the bridge, Halric Dorne stood in silence, one hand resting on the throttle, the other hovering over the primary control console. His eyes scanned the blinking diagnostics, not all green, not even close, but alive. The voice of Mara Quill came steady from her console behind him. Stabilizers at 42%. Reactor cores holding for now. We'll be flying blind through anything heavier than a breeze. Dre Calder chuckled dryly. Good thing we're not planning to land. The ship jolted. A sensor ping lit up across the NAV display. 4 dots, bright, aggressive, and closing fast. Solon Arc, still recovering but steady, stared at the screen. That's a Vanguard-class pursuit wing. Fast movers. Council-backed. Halric's jaw tensed. They're not chasing us because we're alive. They're chasing us because we've got the truth. A second ping. This one worse. A battlecruiser, a Nova-class command ship, had just entered their sector, heading straight for their projected path. The comms panel flared. An automated voice, cold, flat, unmistakably Accord. Unregistered vessel broadcasting on restricted channels. This is Admiral Rian of the USS Valiant. Power down your core and prepare for boarding. Refusal will be met with force. Halric didn't flinch. Cut transmission. Bring us around. Dre blinked. We're charging them? No, Halric said. We're making them work for every inch. The Comet banked hard, inertia straining its aging frame. The stars tilted as the ship dove low, dipping into the field of shattered ice and old wreckage that made the Orphan Belt infamous. From behind, the Valiant launched a barrage, high-frequency disruption bolts screaming toward them like lances of light. One clipped the rear shielding, sending sparks across the engineering deck. Mara's fingers flew across her board. We lose one more shield relay, and the hull's going with it. Halric's voice was steel. Hold it together. He reached for the manual flight stick, an old relic wired in years ago during the Comet's last real mission. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled it forward. The ship responded, not like a machine, but like something remembering how to move. She slipped through the debris like a ghost, bouncing signal off old satellites, masking heat signatures behind long-dead ships. The Iron Comet was airborne again, and the galaxy wasn't ready for it. The Orphan Belt was a graveyard of forgotten wars. Thousands of derelict ships, shattered mining rigs, and debris fields looping endlessly in chaotic orbit. Most NAV systems refused to chart it. Too unstable, too unpredictable. But for the old line, it was home turf. Inside the bridge of the Iron Comet, Halric Dorne tightened his grip on the flight stick, guiding the ship through a chasm of twisted metal and cracked hulls. Jagged wreckage slipped past the viewport at breakneck speed, some pieces barely missing the outer hull. Behind them, the Council strike wing gave chase. 4 sleek interceptors and the looming bulk of the USS Valiant. Tracking 3 pursuit craft closing fast. Drake Halder reported, voice tense but steady. They're trying to force us into open space. Not happening, Halric said. Time to vanish. Mara keyed in a command from her console. The ship's running lights cut out instantly. External transponders powered down. A false thermal spike was launched to the far side of the belt. A mimic signature trailing off like a wounded animal. Decoys away, she said. Let's see how smart their AI really is. 2 of the interceptors broke formation, veering after the false trail. One remained locked on, weaving through debris, firing warning bursts. Dre moved toward the side bay, opening ventral ports, deploying scatter mines. Moments later, clouds of tiny metallic shrapnel drifted into the belt, passive, invisible until impact. The chasing craft caught the edge of the field. Sparks flared. The engine stuttered. It spun off course and slammed into a drifting refinery plate with a satisfying explosion. Solon, watching from the auxiliary seat, let out a quiet breath. That's one, but the Valiant was still coming. Slower, heavier, but relentless. Halric scanned the wreckage ahead and spotted what he needed. A massive, derelict cruiser, hollowed out but still structurally sound, floating in axial spin. We're going inside that husk, he said. Match its rotation. Disappear inside it. Mara frowned. That's a 30-meter clearance, and the hull's unstable. Dre grinned. Just like the old days. Halric pushed the Comet forward. The ship slipped through the broken hull plating of the cruiser and rotated in sync. Lights off. Power reduced to stealth mode. From outside, the cruiser looked no different, just another corpse in the belt. The Valiant flew past, scanners pinging wildly, missing them by seconds. Inside the silent husk, Halric whispered, "We've bought time." Mara replied, "Not much." He nodded. "Then let's make it count." The silence inside the Iron Comet was different now. It wasn't stealth. It was absence. One by one, the crew had fallen, each death not wasted, each sacrifice buying minutes, seconds, pathways forward. Drake Halder had sealed himself in the aft corridor, flooding it with radiation to stop a breach team. No scream, no goodbye, just static over the comms and a status light that blinked red, then stopped. Mara Quill had rerouted the last power loop from her chair, locking the Comet's outer hull into a shielding position between the ship and the pursuing Accord fleet. She'd smiled once, tired, resolved, before the overload fried her neural link. Now, only Halric Dorne and Solonarch remained in the forward control room, the heat rising fast. Panel sparked. Cooling systems had failed 10 minutes ago. The air smelled like burnt copper and melting insulation. Solon clutched his chest, slumped near the base of the transmission array, blood blooming slowly beneath his jacket. The Truthspire archive, it's loaded. But the gate's not stable. The signal won't hold. Halric didn't hesitate. He moved to the manual override, where the beam capacitor controls were exposed, old-style switches, resistant to digital interference. The casing around them was glowing. The metal was warping, but they still worked. They had to. "I'll hold it," Halric said. Salen's eyes widened. The chamber's over temperature. That thing's burning from the inside out. That's why it needs a hand. Halric cut in, pressing his palm flat against the capacitor lock. The metal seared into his skin immediately. He didn't flinch. One final command blinked across the cracked monitor. Transmit sequence. Ready. Warning. Cooling system failure. Override required for continuous broadcast. The room vibrated as the core began its last cycle. Halric stood still, breathing through clenched teeth, eyes locked on the primary display. The screen showed a map of the galaxy, flickering blue nodes lighting up across the stars. Each node represented a listening station, a civilian terminal, a public beacon. And one by one, they began to receive the feed. Command logs, recordings, images, Kessa's voice, civilian screams, Delkar Reach, the truth. And the truth was loud. Salen looked at Halric one last time, voice cracking through the heat and smoke. You did it. Halric didn't look away from the screen. We did. The first beacon to light up was a forgotten relay station orbiting Ciros V, long since downgraded to automated agricultural support. Its receiver, barely functional, began blinking erratically, then steady, then streaming. The next was a civilian transport hub over Nasser Prime, where an old man waiting for a cargo shuttle watched the public terminal stutter, glitch, then display grainy footage of military briefings he was never meant to see. And then more. Across the colonies, across fringe systems and core planets, across every outpost that still dared to listen, screens came to life. Audio feeds crackled into being. Recordings once buried under decades of silence screamed back into the galaxy. Target refused strike order. Civilian presence confirmed. Proceeding with narrative shift. This directive must never leave the internal archive. No survivors. No logs. Unit 4C, Rho has been deemed expendable. The transmission wasn't elegant. It was fractured, raw, incomplete in places, but undeniable. The truth had teeth. In the void, the solar disruptor array collapsed in on itself. Not with an explosion, but a quiet implosion of energy. A final burst of white light flared from the Iron Comet, expanding like a ripple across the stars. It wasn't a weapon, it was a signal. For a moment, every ship within 5 sectors saw it. And for a moment longer, they stopped. On the bridge of the USS Valiant, Admiral Rian stared at the cascading data washing over her consoles. Her crew froze. No one spoke. Ma'am, a lieutenant said, voice barely above a whisper. That transmission, it matches Council encryption. Level 5. Rian's eyes narrowed. Verify the origin. Another pause. It came from the Iron Comet. No one knew what to say after that. And somewhere in the dark, drifting silently above a burned-out nebula, the comet's hull cooled, scarred, melted but intact. No one escaped. No one survived. But the galaxy remembered. 12 names began circulating on civilian networks. First whispered, then shouted. The Comet 12. 12 old soldiers who defied silence. Who bought truth with their lives. They didn't fire a single shot. But they won a war anyway. It began with whispers. Encrypted fragments passed through fringe comm networks, buried in the metadata of music files, embedded in glitch art viewed once before deletion. Comet 12. No official source ever confirmed it. No History Channel broadcast their names. No monument bore their likeness. But across the galaxy, the words began appearing, in graffiti scrawled behind maintenance ducts, in rogue AI, art renderings on broken spaceport terminals, in the hushed stories told by pilots who claimed to have seen a ghost ship blaze white just before the Accords silenced the region. In the lunar slums of Telran's Edge, a teenage coder stumbled across a corrupted archive. Her system flagged it as viral. But instead of deleting, she read it, heard it. And that night, she painted a mural 3 stories high on the underside of the dome. 12 silhouettes standing before a fractured star. The next day, Council agents painted over it. The day after that, it returned, brighter. In the quiet cabins of the asteroid farming colony Mara's Ring, old veterans began leaving behind carved metal slats at docking bays, each etched with a single line. We heard the comet's call. Some called it a hoax. Others, a martyr myth spun from desperation. But those who had fought, those who had lost something they were never allowed to grieve, they knew. On station Deltavox, an unsanctioned audio stream began playing on background bandwidth. The voice was synthetic, distorted, but the cadence was unmistakably human. 12 stood against silence. Not to win, to remember. The stream vanished after 42 seconds. But by then, it had been copied 10,000 times. The Council of Erasure scrambled. Director Lismar issued blanket denials, authorized digital blackouts in sectors suspected of harboring historical corruption. But suppression only fed the fire. The name became a cipher, a resistance flag, a quiet rebellion. More than just data, it was a shared wound. And in that wound, light had returned. Among spaceport janitors, shuttle techs, deep system haulers, people who had nothing left to trust, there was now one thing they could whisper and see others nod. Comet 12. And for the first time in decades, the galaxy dared to question whether its silence had been consent or fear. Director Lismar stood before the assembled press in the shimmering atrium of United Stellar Accord's Central Dispatch, her face illuminated by hollow projectors and carefully tuned lighting arrays. Behind her, rotating visuals painted a picture of chaos averted. Rogue soldiers neutralized, order restored. The official narrative was clear. The Iron Comet was a failed experiment in autonomy. Its final act, a digital attack of falsified memories and tampered records. Her voice was firm, polished, practiced, but for every sentence she spoke, a new wave of public doubt surged through the networks. Because by now, the people of Delkar Reach were speaking. Old men who hadn't spoken of the massacre in decades came forward, recalling the sounds, the burning fields, the drop pods that fell without warning. Mothers recounted children taken under false evacuations. A retired dock supervisor produced a handwritten manifest, names that disappeared the day Operation Veilfall was enacted. Then came a match. One by one, memory recordings, previously redacted or dismissed, aligned perfectly with the data released in the Truthspire archive. Timelines, faces, voice signatures, all of it matched. Too precise to fake. At a small civic hall in Delkar Reach's orbiting habitat Soulmark, 300s gathered. Survivors, descendants, witnesses. One by one, they took the stage, not with anger, but with unbearable clarity. I remember the man with the left eye missing, a woman said, her voice trembling. He carried my father's body out of the flames. His armor was marked with a white comet. A teenager streamed the event live. Within hours, it had over 12 million views across independent mesh nodes. That's when things began to fracture inside the Accord. Senators from fringe worlds demanded independent inquiries. A faction of retired military officers released a joint statement, softly at first, then openly accusing Admiral Tyron Kess of orchestrating the cover-up. Some were dismissed. Others disappeared. But too many voices had risen. Too many eyes had opened. And still, Director Marr insisted. In a final press release, she stood again beneath the emblem of the Accord and declared, "Do not be fooled by viral mythology. We maintain our version of events based on verified records and artificial witness reconstructions. Memory, after all, is malleable." That single line, "Memory is malleable," was clipped, shared, and turned into a rallying cry. Within days, it was scrawled across banners, station walls, even ship hulls, followed by another phrase in stark defiance. But truth is not. It began subtly, just a few bold professors on outer rim learning stations who dared to question the standardized history texts issued by the United Stellar Accord. They weren't radicals or rebels. They were educators who noticed inconsistencies, missing years, entire conflicts skimmed over, names erased or folded into composite figures that made everything simpler, cleaner, more controllable. But after the release of the Truthspire archive, those subtle critiques turned into organized dissent. At Raxus University, a history class staged a silent sit-in, replacing every image in the official curriculum with portraits of the 12 from the Iron Comet. Their instructor, Dr. Elena Marr, was fired within 48 hours. But her dismissal became viral legend. Her final lecture, recorded secretly, circulated faster than the council could erase it. Her words echoed through feeds and forums. If they can erase one ship, they can erase all of us. The comet was not a mistake. It was a mirror. The ripple spread like wildfire. At Novus Prime Academy, students cross-referenced memory logs of Delkar Reach with old orbital scans, proving that the official battle diagrams omitted entire districts. Districts where civilians lived, died, and were never mentioned again. On smaller worlds, parents began requesting alternative history modules for their children, something unthinkable just months prior. Libraries once purged under Accord guidance began quietly re-importing blacklisted archives. Even AI curators, long conditioned to uphold the official historical record, started flagging contradictions their ethics cores couldn't reconcile. And the most telling sign? Recruitment rates dropped. In a society where joining the Accord's forces had once been seen as noble, now young cadets asked uncomfortable questions. Were the medals my grandfather earned given for truth or silence? A growing number of planetary assemblies, especially from border systems, voted to open formal inquiries into wartime decisions once thought sacred. The Delkar hearings, as they came to be known, weren't merely about the Iron Comet anymore. They questioned the entire foundation of the Accord's authority. The Council tried to fight back, releasing new documentaries, polished with synthetic emotional cues and algorithmic bias. But for every polished lie, a dozen raw testimonies rose from the dark. People no longer asked what happened. They asked who had kept it from them. And somewhere in the deeper reaches of space, the whisper of Comet 12 continued. No longer a secret, but a fracture line through the spine of an empire built on omission. In the far edges of civilized space, places where the Council of Erasure believed influence faded into silence, small transmission towers began blinking back to life. Dust-choked, long-abandoned data stations once slated for decommissioning were suddenly humming with restored purpose. One by one, TruthSpire archive nodes flared open again. The backups had survived, some deep in planetary vaults, others hidden within smuggler relays or embedded in memory cores of old NAV drones. But they were there, fragments of the real story, of voices long thought erased. Technicians on backwater stations described the moment simply. It started downloading itself. They didn't know how. All they saw was a flicker, a pulse in the system, and then the archive unfolded. The files bore a seal. Operation Veilfall. Override granted. Source, Comet 12. It was unmistakable. At the center of each recovered node was a voice file, scratchy, static-laced, recorded in the final moments aboard the Iron Comet. The voice belonged to Halric Dorne, but it sounded older than war, more human than hero. To whoever finds this, I don't expect you to believe it all. Hell, I wouldn't. But if you're hearing this, that means the truth made it through. It means the lie didn't win. They'll try to twist this to say we were broken, rogue, unhinged. Maybe we were, but we never stopped being human. We remembered what orders shouldn't be followed. And if I have to die, if we all do, let it be in truth, not in silence. The message was raw. No patriotic swells. No dramatic strings. Just a man who'd lived long enough to know history was as fragile as breath. People wept. In quiet homes. In public squares. In orbiting refineries and canyon-deep mining colonies. Across cultures and species, the same reaction, grief and clarity. The Accord scrambled to issue countermessages, but they were too late. The signal was everywhere, bouncing across the mesh networks, sealed into the quantum tapes of traders and the memory banks of starships. It didn't scream revolution. It whispered remembrance. And in that whisper, millions found the strength to say, no more forgetting. The monument stood quiet under the twin suns of Delkar Reach, 12 pillars of scorched steel arranged in the arc of a comet's tail. Each bore a name that once never appeared in official records. Each face, now etched in glass and starlight, once belonged to a ghost. Terran Vex, older now, his once sharp voice mellowed with time and purpose, sat at the foot of the memorial. Children gathered around him on soft synth grass, their eyes wide not with fear, but with reverence. They didn't come for history lessons. They came for stories. Terran placed a worn datapad on his lap and tapped the screen, bringing up a faded photo. The crew of the Iron Comet, shoulder to shoulder, captured in a rare moment before the world turned on them. They weren't perfect, he began, his voice steady. They argued. They bled. Some made terrible choices. But when the time came, they chose truth over comfort and hope over silence. The children listened, quiet as stone. There was a time, he continued, when saying their names out loud could get you erased. Not anymore. Now, schools teach their mission. Statues stand in their honor. And every transmission that passes through this region carries a simple encryption tag. He held up the datapad and smiled. C-12 alive. One of the youngest children raised her hand. Do you think they knew we'd be here someday? Talking about them. Terran looked to the sky, where freighter trails etched silver scars across blue. No, he said softly. They weren't trying to be remembered. They were trying to stop us from forgetting. The wind picked up slightly, whistling through the hollow columns. It didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like motion, like flight. And as the suns dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the 12 pillars, the world turned, not away from the past, but toward it, with eyes wide open. The Iron Comet was gone, but its light had never stopped moving. And so, the truth was not buried. It was carried on data streams, on stories whispered between stars, on the hearts of those who still believe courage means standing even when you know you'll fall. If the Iron Comet meant something to you, if their story stirred even a spark inside you, then let that light live on. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes in truth. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that echo across galaxies. Until next time, keep listening and keep remembering.